Welcome to the latest edition of Dynamic Political Centrism, hosted by Alan Steinberg, produced by Dr. Yonatan Yoni Yares. Our guest, Dr. Julia Sass Rubin, Associate Dean of Academic Programs and Director of the Public Policy Program at the Edward J. Bloustein School of Planning and Public Policy at Rutgers University.
Good evening and welcome. I am Alan Steinberg, the voice of Dynamic Political Centrism, and we have a tremendous show tonight featuring one of the heroes of democracy, and I say that 100% emphatically, without any hyperbole, Dr. Julia Sass Rubin, who has made New Jersey history recently. But I'm going to introduce her in a rather strange way because over the weekend, another hero of democracy emerged for me. And I would be negligent if I didn't mention it just for 2 minutes here. And that hero of democracy is Danielle Sassoon. And I want to tell you why it's so meaningful to me. I'm a member of the Orthodox Jewish community, and I also have a reputation of being the most anti-Trump journalist in New Jersey. It's a reputation I'm very proud of. I left the Republican Party because of Trump. I think he is an avatar of neo-fascism, and I have made this emphatically clear. And every night I go to bed, I say this without hyperbole again, I go tonight a little frightened as to what awaits us and what awaits all of our families. And when I saw this woman of principle, Danielle Sassoon, a brilliant woman, stand up for democracy, refusing to engage in Trump corruption, even though she was a Trump appointee leaving the position, I said, this is a hero of democracy in our time. And also adding on to that, it meant something special to me. I'm a member of the Orthodox Jewish community, and I've been a pariah in that community politically now for almost 10 years because of my anti-Trump. He gained a lot of followers. I don't think it's a proud chapter in the history of the American Orthodox Jewish community, and I have stuck to my principle on that. But when I saw a woman who was a Trump supporter standing up against Trump, I said, this woman is a rallying cry for anti-Trump Orthodox Jews like myself. I'm proud of her. And she is now a member of my Alan Steinberg Hall of Fame for Heroines of Democracy. And Julia Sass Rubin is a charter member, just like Ty Cobb was a charter member of the Baseball Hall of Fame back in 1937. So, Julia, welcome to our show.
Wow, thank you, Ellen. That's an incredible introduction. I'm honored to be, here, and I'm honored to be mentioned in the same range as Sassoon, because I agree with you. I think she is a really bold and brave individual.
Well, you and I have something else in common. I love when you talk about your daughter and the various publications I've read, and your husband Gary. It's a great thing when a person's whole family is involved like this in a fight for democracy, because I never thought we would have to fight for democracy in my lifetime. I never thought that democracy would be so on edge. And sure enough, it is. But when you mention your daughter, I love her name. Is it Reza or Raisa?
Raisa, like Raisa Gorbachev.
Okay, well, yeah, hey, there you go. He ended up being a hero of democracy, too, even though we never expected it. But I have a sister. Her Hebrew name is actually, it's a Yiddish name, Brina Reza. And Reza and Raisa are very similar names. I think they both mean rose of some sort, you know? And so I now have something in common with Julia Sass Rubin, and it puts me in good company that I have a friend who is a true Princeton and national intellectual.
You're way too kind, Alan. Way
No,
too
I'm being
kind.
accurately descriptive. Never challenge my characterization. You ought to hear my negative ones. Oh, you ought to hear the way I have denounced the Kushners in no uncertain terms. I have definitely, I'm definitely online with both positive and negative. But let's first talk about you personally, because
Okay.
what was great about researching this show is how much there is on the internet about you. And it was all right. Sometimes you don't get quality stuff on the internet, but this stuff was of real quality, including from Tapinto, from Bloustein School itself. I must mention the Bloustein School. One of my dearest friends in life was a person that I started. It was a story in itself, although I'm not that significant, but it still was an interesting story. It was a story about Jim Florio. And we had been political adversaries for years. You know, when I was on the Assembly Republican staff in the New Jersey Assembly, when I served in the Whitman administration. And then one day when I was serving in the Bush administration, I invited him to my office because he was a great environmentalist. If anyone disputed that, they were just out of their minds and off the distribution. I invited him to my office for a half-hour meeting, and it was great. He stayed for an hour and a half. I said, no, keep going, keep going. I learned more about the environment in that hour and a half time, but then we started to get together personally. And what emerged from me about him, I have to use this word, it was a feeling of love, because we both had a love of American democracy. We both, I get a little emotional talking about Jim because it was one of the great things in my life, but his identification with the Bloustein School, as far as I'm concerned, your identification and his makes the Bloustein School one of the greatest schools. If anyone challenges me on this, they'll never be in my show again. It's one of the greatest schools of public policy in the world, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank
And
you,
the fact that Jim was on there, and you know, he and I would get together once a month. His secretary used to tell me he loves getting together with you because he's bored by the practice of law. And so we would get out and we would talk. And then the COVID hit, and so our personal meetings, we had to do it with FaceTime. But his is a loss to New Jersey, but
it is.
it was an honor to the Bloustein School, and it makes the Bloustein School everything it is. So
It was wonderful having Jim affiliated. He used to teach a course there on Monday mornings at 9 o'clock. It was very Jim. It had to be a specific time and a very early time, and students would show up for him. So, yeah, it's a big loss to have him gone. I agree.
He used to work out in the mornings too. I don't know how he did it, but it was really sad towards the end because he was a vital, energetic man.
Yeah.
I think he was the greatest intellectual of all the New Jersey governors. You know, I rank him that high, and he was self-educated to a large extent. He reminded me of Walter LaCure that way, but he was a high school dropout. He went to the Columbia Institute, studied with Richard Neustadt, and we would discuss Neustadt. I went to Northwestern. I would discuss intellectuals I studied with there. It was just an elevation of the mind, and talking to you is the same way. So let's get going. All right, you're originally from Russia. And the way you emerged and built and basically, I used the word established yourself in life. Tell us that story, starting from Russia.
It's a very long story. I don't think your listeners are going to want to hear all the details.
You know how to condense it. Give us the condensed.
Okay, I'll give you the short version. So my family emigrated from the former Soviet Union, from Leningrad at the time, in 1971 when I was a young child. And we emigrated to Israel. With the full intention of staying there. We had family that had emigrated from the Ukraine, which was still part of the Soviet Union, about a year and a half earlier, and we were going to join them. And what ended up happening was my mom, who was a widow, had a distant relative in the US, a husband of a cousin, and the cousin had also passed away. So a widow and a widower. And he came to Israel and asked her to marry him. And so we moved to America to kind of let them date for a while, I guess. He turned over his house to us, and she finally agreed to marry him a couple of months later. And so they got married, and I grew up. Half of my childhood was in the US, and almost half of my childhood was in Russia. So that's how I ended up here.
Boy, we get a romance story out of this too.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Where did you grow up in the States?
It gets better and better.
Oh, I love it.
I grew up in Ogden, Utah.
Now that is a surprise.
Yep.
And you went to Harvard. Harvard and Ogden, Utah, perfect together. But go ahead. This is a classic.
Well, his family had emigrated from Eastern Europe, when the big wave of Russian Jewish emigres, and they came to Brooklyn, and they didn't like it, so they just kept going west. And Utah was where they decided to settle. So he had been born and raised there. He had a house there and a business. And that's where we ended up moving to. It was a very interesting experience to grow up there in the 1970s, I have to say.
The only note of dissonance, I'm a lover of Brooklyn, just like Pete Hamill was. And I absolutely adore, and I mourn for the Brooklyn Dodgers, the late Brooklyn Dodgers, once a year. It's like a yard side for the Dodgers, you know. So But other than that, I could make a movie out of this. Ogden, Utah, and the
And the
former
love story,
Soviet.
right? It's a great
Yeah,
story.
it's a
It
love
is.
story. Boy, I wasn't expecting that. That's like a bonus to the show.
Yeah.
But that's interesting. So I guess you went to high school out there, and then you went to Harvard, undergraduate and graduate.
Right. I could only get into one school. Yep. I went through
Only one school, you
fourth,
get into Harvard. That's
fourth,
like, come
fourth
on.
grade all the way up through high school in Utah. And then I came out east and yeah, and I went to Harvard for undergrad and then worked for a while and came back for graduate school.
Well, let
So
me ask you something. The Bloustein School, it seems like you are a great veteran of that school. Did you teach anywhere other than Bloustein after you got your PhD at Harvard?
I did a postdoc at Brown for a year and I taught
Oh, you're
there.
a graduate fellow, right? Right.
Yeah. So, and then I had a fellowship to Bangkok, Thailand on a Henry Luce fellowship. And I taught at Assumption University in Thailand for a year as well. So, and then I taught at Harvard as a doctoral student. But post PhD, those are the places I taught at Brown and Assumption. And then, yeah, I've been at Bloustein. This is my 22nd year, I think it
You
is,
don't
along
look
with
old
my
enough
daughter.
for a 22nd year.
Oh, you're very kind.
I just turned
Um,
75, so I can say that.
you look great, Ellen.
Oh, geez, now I'm fully complimented. But no, that's very interesting. You seem to have. Let me ask you this: what was the focus of your doctoral study? Because I'm going to get something off that.
So my dissertation was my PhD is in organizational behavior, which is a joint program between the Harvard Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, Sociology and Psychology Department, and the Business School. And so it was a study of a form of community development finance. I was looking at the organizations and the layout of the industry because it was new and it hadn't really been researched very much. So I won't bore you with the organizational
I'm
theory.
not bored.
Just
This is
framed
very
it.
relevant, actually.
Okay, so that was it. I was looking at developmental venture capital in the US and how it was used and how it was structured and how the industry grew.
Well, since now there's a positive and negative to that. No, it's total positive. You studied that. But the positive of that sector, on the one hand, is in the nonprofit sector. We had on Stacy Berger this week. She was
Hmm.
terrific.
I saw that. She's
Yeah,
wonderful. I
Stacy
love
is a
Stacy.
superstar, and the nonprofit sector is offering the solutions to affordable housing. They're not implementing the policy. And I also had on Linda Schwimmer from the
Yeah, I
medical
saw that too. That's
and
great.
so that sector. On the other hand, you have the venture sector where you're getting these oligarchs from.
Yeah.
So it's like I feel stuck when I think of that between the rock and a hard place.
And that's exactly what my dissertation was about. It's how do you take these two very different fields of industry and bring them together in an organization? What's the tension that that creates, and how do they survive, or do they survive? So you nailed it without even reading the dissertation. You saved yourself a lot of pain there.
No, it's not pain. I will say this of Julia Sass Rubin. She reminds me of what JFK once said about Thomas Jefferson. JFK said he was at a dinner. Jackie was a great person to outreach to the arts, and she had a wonderful legacy of her own, despite all the pain she went through. But she would outreach to the arts and the music community. And they had a dinner, and JFK, he was very nimble with his words. He came in, he said, "Yes, this is a great evening." With that Bostonian accent, he said, "We have not had so much talent in one room since Thomas Jefferson dined alone." And you're establishing that for academia tonight.
You are funny and very, very kind. So I'll take it. I'll take it.
All right, what the heck? Okay, but again, you had a guaranteed good future in academia, but you did something that went beyond academia, and that's where we're at. The main thrust of the show tonight is on the focus. You became a hero of democracy because the county line had been a real vehicle for control of both parties in New Jersey by a political oligarchy. That's what it came down to. I don't know. Wait, I have to ask you two things just preliminarily. It's not clear to me that decision of Judge is it pronounced
Karashi,
Karashi or Kawashi?
Karashi, I believe, but I could be
Karashi,
wrong on
yeah.
that.
That's the first time I ever saw it, by the way, in his opinion, that outlawed the county line. That's the first time I ever, and I'm a lawyer myself, even though I'm retired, I don't practice, but I maintain my memberships and everything else. That's the first time I ever saw a judge, and I have experience with cases, give so much credit to an academic. I mean, boy, he could have done commercials for you after what he said about you.
I think it's because there were, there weren't that many people in this area who were doing research. So I think it was just fortunate for me that I had done this research at the right time. But there were a couple other expert witnesses who were cited as well, in particularly a colleague in the University of Michigan, Josh, who has done a lot of research around ballots, but not specific to New Jersey. But he did an experiment basically to test out the impact of the county line. And what was interesting is I had done this descriptive statistics looking historical data, and he did an experiment where he sent two different sets of ballots to people to see how they would vote, actual New Jersey voters. And we came out with essentially the same answer in terms of the impact, the percentage vote differential that the county line provided. So that was really interesting.
Well, let me ask you
Methodologies.
two things I'm not clear on. Number one, is that decision, does it apply to the Republican side as well? I was not clear of that for some time.
So the decision did not apply to Republicans, and the decision was limited to the June 2024 primary, as you know. But what has happened since then? Well, first of all, two counties voluntarily used the office block ballot, which is what the judge required, in their Republican primaries, even though they didn't have to, which was Atlantic and Burlington. But then the lawyers who brought the lawsuit on behalf of Andy Kim reached settlements with 17 counties, because two counties don't have a county line. I think all the counties have settled except Bergen and Union, if I'm not mistaken. And these settlements essentially codified the decision and made it applicable to everyone, Republicans, Democrats, going forward. And then, of course, the legislature set up a special committee in the assembly to pass legislation on this issue. And the settlements that they reached with the county clerks said that they would continue unless the legislature passed legislation overriding them. So the assembly in December adopted legislation essentially codifying also Karashi's decision. There's some differences which I'm happy to talk about, but for the most part,
I would like to talk about them. Yes,
for the most part, it follows his decision. And this was after holding a series of public hearings in this special committee that was set up in the assembly. The Senate, did not hold public hearings. They just did a more internal process. And they introduced a bill a couple of days ago, which Senate President Scutari is the only sponsor on it right now. And it is going to be heard in the Judiciary Committee on Thursday at 11 o'clock in Trenton. And it'll be voted out of the committee on Thursday. And then I'm expecting it to be voted on by the full Senate by the end of the month, because they want to have legislation that would give the clerks direction as early as possible so that they know how to structure the ballot.
I still have to say this is remarkable progress, and I'll tell you why I feel that way. Having been a political, very involved person, and that included the years I was so involved with the establishment, so to speak, the members of the legislature really feel themselves to be indebted to county chairs. I am amazed, and county chairs, some of them are good friends of mine, still, even with what I've written. I have dinner with some of them, lunch, and I enjoy the schmoozing part of politics too. But they're very jealous of their powers. I don't say that in an evil way. And I am amazed that legislators, unless they got tacit consent somehow from the county chairs, unless the county chairs feel it's inevitable, that they would vote on this. I'm stunned.
So I'll give you my theory. First of all, I think that the possibility of this being continually litigated if they did not come to some sort of an agreement. Once these agreements were reached with the county clerks, we were going to not have a county line anymore, right? And I think the reason the county clerks went that route is they realized that they weren't going to prevail in court, most likely, because the judge had been upheld by, his decision had been upheld by the appellate division, and it just did not seem like there was a good legal path to overturning that. So I think they figured, cut your losses. It's going to cost a lot of taxpayer dollars. There's not a lot of support to keep suing. And then once those agreements were reached, we were going to have an office block ballot. I think the reason the assembly did not try to go back to a worse ballot was that they felt that they too would be challenged in court and would lose. And I also think that they are already acting differently because the county line is gone. And I think a piece of this is that Fulop is running, as I'm sure you know, it's
Very well.
at least 35 people now he's running as a slate for assembly races across the state. And I think that the assembly, which is up, of course, in June for the primary and then in November, is very conscious of the fact that they are going to be challenged. And they did not want to give these good government challengers a weapon by trying to mess with the ballot, which would put them in potentially legal jeopardy from a challenge and also would make them more vulnerable, I think, for reelection. So I
So the
suspect
Fulop
that those,
challenge, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
no, I was just
interrupt.
going to say, I suspect that that's why the bill is as good as it is. They were constrained by the legal decision, and then whatever room they had within the parameters of the decision, I think they were worried about the political consequences of that.
I know Steve Fulop well, and he is a keen observer of media, and I'm going to call him tonight and tell him he better watch this podcast because he's got a good shout out. Believe me, he will watch the podcast. He'll probably want to send it out to everybody. But
Well, whoever you're supporting for governor, I'm not making,
I didn't say
I'm
I was
not,
supporting him.
right. I'm not endorsing anybody. I'm just saying that I think the fact that he's running people for the assembly is so different than New Jersey traditionally is. I mean, I'm sure you know that after the census and the redistricting, we had all these retirements in the Senate and the Assembly, very high retirement rate in New Jersey legislature. And still, the number of seats that were actually contested in the primary was approximately 11%, which is just abysmal. And so to have 35, 36, however many people he ends up with running for these 80 positions is already historic. Just to have that many challengers against incumbents, basically. So who, that's already just breaking the rules in New Jersey. And I think that that is having an impact.
Well, you're a revolutionary too, and I want to explain that. I'll explain that to your daughter too. You're a revolutionary, not, and it's marvelous what you said. You're not endorsing any candidate
No,
at all, and it's not intended to. It is the process that is so bad because the process has made these primaries. I'll tell you when we've had this change happen before. Back in 1981, it looked like Pat Kramer was a sure shot Republican nominee. And then I think it was called the open primary statute was passed.
yep, open primary
At
law.
that time,
Exactly.
I worked with one of the big men in my life, Marty Herman, who was the Democrat assembly chair. And I was like, he was a great guy. He still is a great guy. And but I learned more about politics from him. I was a Republican. He was a Democrat. He used to let me listen into his phone calls, and it was like getting an education, as well as a good legal education as a lawyer. But anyway, I remember at the time, Marty was very close to Florio. But on the Republican side, it looked like Pat Kramer was in like Flynn for the Republican gubernatorial nomination. And when they passed the Open Primary Act, that opened the door wide. That made history. That opened the door wide for Tom Kean. Tom Kean won the primary comfortably. And it was a challenge that made history. He was one of the state's great governors. That was, of course, the pre-Trump era of the Republican Party, when I was proud to be in the party, and I've left ever since. But having said that, that made history. But you made history this time. And let me just give you I tend to talk a little too long, but let me give you the condensed Reader's Digest version of what I would say. It used to be that whatever the county chairs decided, the primary was over. Unless it only happened once successfully, and that was when Jeff Bell beat Clifford Case and but they didn't have a line in that primary either. They had a county endorsement, but that whenever you've had the county line, I think it was the U case in 1991 that brought the line back. Whatever the line was, the primary was basically over. It shut Kerry Edwards out in his battle against Christy Whitman in 1993. But now you have allowed for it's your efforts, and Judge Quarashi gave you the credit. You should have those words immortalized on your home. But what you did is basically now you've established a primary system that will allow the talent to go to the top. And we've been deprived of good talent. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I think you have to give Andy Kim a lot of credit and also
Oh, sure.
the brilliant legal team, because without Andy Kim, none of this would have happened. And honestly, without the challenge that, to the Senate race that Governor Murphy's wife, Tammy Murphy, presented, because I think that Andy Kim would not have brought the legal action if there hadn't been this contest for the Democratic nomination for the Senate from Tammy Murphy. So I think all of these pieces kind of had to fall together. I was just very lucky that my research was available in this particular moment. I don't think the research on its own was going to change things, but because Tammy Murphy decided to run, because Andy Kim was running, because Andy Kim was willing to file a legal action to try to defeat the line, and my research was available, things kind of came together. I appreciate very much how incredibly kind you're being. I just want to make sure that we kind of spell out all the different
Oh, we'll
pieces.
give
I
credit to
cannot
everybody.
take credit for what has happened.
But let me ask you something, and I've studied this before. I think what's relevant about your research is what was the nature of the advantage that the line would give to candidates?
So the line provided a real visual kick, and it's going to be tested. My theory, which I'm going to lay out, is going to be tested in the next couple of primaries. We'll see how that plays out. But my theory is that just seeing usually it's a vertical line. Some 4 or 5 counties have a horizontal line, but just seeing all the names in a very orderly way on the ballot and all the other candidates sort of scattered in various places on the ballot really signals to people whom they're supposed to vote for. Of course, the parties reinforce this by sending literature to their most religiously devout, and I don't mean literally religiously, but their most devout voters, saying vote column A or vote the line. But just the visual of the line is very, very powerful. And of course, at the top of the line is the person who is running for the most powerful office that cycle, whether it's president or Senate or governor. And people tend to know those candidates. They may not know who their state senator is or their assembly member, but they probably know who's running for the Senate or who their current senator is or who's running for governor. So that, in combination with this row of every position has somebody running, and or column rather, of every position has somebody running, and all the other people are not in a column or row, they're scattered around the ballot. I think just visually that is very powerful. So what I found is that if you compared people who had the other advantages, so they were endorsed by the party, they had, all the other advantages of endorsement, like boots on the ground and money, presumably for their campaigns, but there was no county line for whatever reason in their election. Versus when they had the county line, I found that particularly for non-incumbents, it was a double-digit advantage. It was, I think, 12 points for incumbents and 15 or 16 for non-incumbents. You can tell it's been a few months. I'm trying to remember my own findings, but it was in that range, basically. That is a substantial advantage to have
Yes.
a 12 to 15 or 16 point edge in any given contest. And that was the average. There were some races where it was much larger than that. And of course, some races where it was smaller. So having the line, if you looked at the historical data, just presented an almost insurmountable edge. Very few people, especially for the state legislature, won their primaries if they did not have the line. And incumbents lost most of the time if they lost the line. So the incumbency was less advantageous than having the county line.
That is fascinating, and but it leads to another issue that we're going to confront in the months ahead. For example, I am not against party organizations. I think, in a sense, party organizations, and I know you're not either. It's just the aspect of the line which creates the unfairness. But party organizations normally are avenues for newcomers in politics who get involved in the organization. They become conversant of the other members of the organization, and they work their way up. Look, that's how I got involved. I didn't fight City Hall. But nevertheless, that's how people get involved and they get appointed to positions and all the rest. The question is, how much will the organization be without worth in a primary without the line? Because organizations, as you mentioned, they still are the main fundraisers in the county. They still are the main get out the vote entities. And the question now, of course, there are occasionally candidates who will set up their own parallel get out the vote and their own parallel fundraising. In fact, you mentioned Fulop before, and this is not an endorsement. I want to be careful on this. But what he's tried to do is going to have win or lose is going to have a lot of significance
Yes.
because what he's doing is he's setting up parallel organizations for the challenge. In your view, and this is one of the key questions of this hour, in your view, how much is organizational support without the line worth in terms of get out the vote and fundraising, historically speaking?
It really depends, of course, on the specifics of the contest and how much the county organization, how many boots on the ground it has, how much money it has to spend. So, but without controlling for all that, what I found was that if you just looked at how people did when they were um, on the line versus when their opponent was on the line, that was worth approximately an average of about 35 percentage points.
That's a
And
lot.
that's a lot. But if you looked at how they did when they had the other party benefits, but they didn't have the line, then it was more like 15 percentage points. Now, the difference is not actually 20. We're doing a different metric. But
But that's
I
a
think
large
that
difference.
it's a large difference, but it's slightly different methodology. So it's not really like you can subtract A from B. But I would say, if you have a good party organization, it's probably worth 10 to 15 percentage points. If they really can get the vote out, if they really can provide resources. Again, that varies a lot by county, right? And it's interesting. I was talking to a reporter today who is doing a story for the Star Ledger or NJ.com about the impact of gutting the pay-to-play provision under the Election Transparency Act a few years
Mm-hmm.
back. And what he's found, I don't want to get ahead of his story, but he's finding increasing amounts of donations to county organizations, especially the most powerful ones like Middlesex, in the years since the pay-to-play provisions were struck down, which is not surprising, right?
No.
Given how much power the county organizations have in terms of the legislature to put people in office and to get specific legislation enacted, it's not surprising that folks who want to do business want to have them on their side. Um, so if you have those kinds of resources coming in, you can do a lot to support your candidates beyond the county line. That it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, because if they lose the county line, which it looks like they will they, and they can't decide who's going to win elections, will people still be willing to donate large amounts of money because they can't anymore, they can't guarantee that they'll be able to deliver, right?
I hear
So,
you, and that is one of the there's a number of wild cards in this election.
oh yeah.
That is one of them. How are donations going to be affected by the decline of pay to play as a barrier? But there are two others also. This election, I'm a guy, I know how to analyze it, but I'm wrong a lot of times in my predictions.
We all are.
I know, but I think I've asked myself because I've been embarrassed at times. I think the answer is that a lot of people nowadays make up their minds at the very last minute and are not reflected in polls. And a lot of times, poll questioning, I don't think has been that effective. I think that polling misses a lot. There are good pollsters out there. There's like in New Jersey, you have Dan Casino, Patrick Murray. These are good pollsters. But there is a large undercurrent of people voting. But here's where I think this election is going to really be fascinating. And I'm not going to make a prediction because I don't want people to make fun of me if I'm wrong. But yeah, for example, Josh Gottheimer, very marvelously articulate person. He'll have a lot of Jewish community support because of his views on Israel, which is a large block of voters. But the question is, will the money give him the advantage? And that depends on how effectively it is spent. And of course, a lot of his money is federal, and there's a procedure for getting it over to state campaigns. But he has a money advantage. Mikey Sherrill has a large advantage of county chairs endorsing her. If the line was still in existence, she would be the definite favorite.
I think so too.
However, she would be a definite favorite. However, the question is this: in some counties like Essex, in order to predict how Essex County will come out in this election, you're better off flipping a coin. I don't know. I cannot fathom how that's going to come out because you have Sean Spiller, a former mayor of Montclair, as they say, the sovereign state of Montclair. You have Ras Baraka. Ras has been a wonderful surprise. I am fond of him. I admit that, but Ras has been a marvelous surprise in that they have always negated the chances, and this is a subtle form of racism. They've always negated the idea. I've had party power say, "How do you think we can elect an African American mayor of Newark?" I said, "Well, that's easy. Just vote." But people are negating him. But he was the star of the debates, and I do think years ago, Marty Herman, my ex-boss, I asked him how many people do you think watch the debates, and he said more than you think. That was the greatest answer I ever got. But he was a star of the debates, and people do watch internet shows nowadays. But Mikey will get a share of Essex. Roz will get the African American vote in Essex. So without the line, as we say in Hebrew, it's a real
Wide
baba
open.
gun.
That's right. It's wide open as a democracy is supposed to be, right? We're supposed to,
Exactly.
yeah.
And then you have the Fulop challenge. Now, Fulop is interesting in this regard. He has a lot of mayors. Mayors were normally thought to be not incompetent, but inferior to county chairs in terms of getting out the vote. This is their big chance. He's counting on them. If they get out the county vote and he wins the primary, it is a huge challenge to the authority and the effectiveness of county chairs. I talk to county chairs all the time. And county, it's part of what my column and Substack is all about. I talk to the county chairs, and they're very confident in their powers. The Democrats, they've endorsed Mikey. They think they're going to carry the day. I'm not so sure. I'm not saying this positive or negatively, so I'm not making a prediction. I'm not a fool. But the Andy Kim case will have in my view, a revolutionary impact on New Jersey politics. I'm interested in how you feel about it.
No, I totally agree with you. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch. So, I'm sharpening my pencils. I'm going to be watching the results and analyzing the results.
I'm watching polling, I'm watching trends, and I'm scratching my head.
Yeah.
Because none of us really know how it's going to turn out. Let me ask you another question. I'm suggesting this as a next area of study, although I'm sure people have topics for study all the time. I'm curious as to the impact of the change of media in elections. I'm going to have a show on this in New Jersey because, you have television. New Jersey relies on New York and Philadelphia TV, and that's expensive.
Right.
You can get good cable packages, but the question is how many people really are watching. It's a great thing if you're watching ESPN and they're doing political commercials. That's as good as having network TV, but they're not on that weekend before the general election. But I'd be interested in, as part of your future research, because everyone will come to you. Let me just gratuitously suggest it. I would love to see a study by you as to how the change of media, like more social media, more email, how that's affecting New Jersey elections.
It's a great topic.
Well, I hope you take me up on that because
I think there are people who are more expert in this than I. That's the only thing. So it's a great topic. It would be fascinating to study, but I think there are probably people who would be better positioned to do it.
But you know what? I do see television shows. This is another reason I value your expertise. And you're going to be embarrassedly silent on this. I expect you to be. Okay.
Now I'm nervous, Alan.
Yeah, good. I want to make you a little nervous. Okay. I can't be all kind. This is not pertinent to you personally. I watch Morning Joe every day, and I watch Morning Joe because I want to know what the zeitgeist is out there. Although I think a lot of times he's full of prunes, but nevertheless, I watch him every morning. I get up and watch. I don't like Mark Levin, but he came up with the nickname Morning Schmo and just cracked me up. But all America's watching Morning Joe. And I watch in the morning. He has on media experts like Donnie Deutsch. They may be great media experts, but political media is very different.
Different. Yeah.
And they can't, and there's different voters. There's low information voters, there's high information voters. This is all different. And I
Yeah.
have a feeling that, and then there's what is it now, Generation Z, the youngest generation, they have their own habits. I think a lot of this is not being picked up, but I think as a result of you opening the process from the open primary, I think this is going to become the changing media is going to be a large factor.
It's going to be fascinating. Yeah, I think campaign finance with the changes in the rules around campaign funding in New Jersey with the quote unquote election transparency act and the changes to the county line to the primary ballot, it's going to be a very interesting few years to see how that shakes up. I agree with you.
It really is, and we're just getting started. But one thing I value about you is, every morning he has on. John, you won't comment this, I'm sure, but you're too much of a distinguished, polite person. But I'm a history freak. I went to Northwestern. I studied with some of the greatest historians in the world there. Now, I'm grateful to my late parents that they enabled me to go there every day because that's the real value of an institution like Harvard and some of these elite colleges is the qualities of the professors. He
And I
has
and I
on
met
every
my husband there. That was really nice too.
well, that's the best benefit of all. Okay, Gary is he's listed as benefit number one. Well, he and Rais are 1, 2 as an
Very good.
enemy. It's like, but
Absolutely.
a lot of times they have on historians. For example, he has on John Meacham. John Meacham has never gotten a Ph.D. And he has on Michael Beschloss. He's another one that's never gotten a Ph.D. These are what I call pop historians. People like Doug Brinkley, who's a great scholarly American historian, is never on. They don't have Julia Sass Rubin on the. I want you on there. I'm going to yell at them.
I don't know that the county line is really that
Oh,
interesting
yes,
at a
it
national
is. And
level.
I'm being serious here. Now, let me tell you why. Because America right now is in turmoil. And the question is all of our institutions are under challenge. Now, that includes political organizations. No, let me tell you what you have more national relevance than you realize. I'm really giving it to you. No, you do. Because if party organizations decline, the question is that going to create more chaos? Or is it going to be a good factor of a more open process? This is very critical because we're in the era of Trump chaos where we have no idea what institutions are going to hold and not. And county organizations is part of that. And the line was an illegitimate way of them maintaining
Right.
power, but there are good things about them too. Which I think I'm going to write a letter to Morning Joe saying, get her on the air.
Okay. Well, I
And
mean, other states do have powerful political parties. I think the role of the party is what's different. Rather than being a political machine, which is essentially what the most potent county organizations have been in New Jersey, the role of parties is to get people elected, not to
100%.
decide who's going to be elected, but to get people elected in the general election, right? And to hold the structures that allow a primary to take place. So I think we've had a distorted party system, which is essentially what you're saying as well.
Yes,
But I think there is still a very important role for parties, which is to allow people to, to identify a set of ideas and to help uh, train candidates and identify candidates and get candidates elected. I feel like New Jersey's parties have been somewhat lazy because so much of the focus is on being political machines and on accumulating power and resources rather than on ideas. Political machines are not ideological. I think many of these county party organizations would be Republican if we were a Republican majority state. Some of these folks don't really have a strong allegiance to a set of values. It's about being in control. It's about the power and the resources that it brings, right? And so I think that by eliminating this incredible advantage that the county line provided and forcing the parties to become what they should be, in my view, which is a method of identifying and electing candidates who support a set of ideas. I think that would
And,
be
and,
actually
and
beneficial for New Jersey as far as our party structure, party behavior. I think it would be really good. And that's what they do in most other states.
and generating the ideas.
And
That's the thing,
generating the
and being a
ideas.
forum and opening the process up. But in the general elections, present two lawful, I stress lawful because with Trump, I can't say lawful anymore, two lawful contrasting liberal and conservative positions. Look, and
Yes.
yet being open. But I'm going on to another topic that I was unaware
Okay.
of in the life of Julie Sass Rubin. I believe your husband, Gary Stankiewicz, has been a
Right.
big.
Yeah.
See, I memorize names. Okay, uh, he's been a major assist to you, and your daughter Raisa is going to be involved too. And that's in terms of public schools. And you are, I believe, the leader in Save Our Schools in New Jersey.
So I'm one of the people who started Save Our Schools, which was the first year of Governor Christie's term as governor. That tells you how many years ago it was.
Well, that's a reason to start Save Our Schools. He was not a great advocate of public education.
Yeah, he certainly was a challenge to public education.
That
Yes.
is the biggest understatement since Ted Williams said he thought he could hit.
So we
But
started Save Our Schools. As a parent, I had no expertise in public education at the time. As I mentioned earlier, my research was on developmental finance, but we had a 7-year-old daughter who was in public education, a wonderful local public school in Princeton. And I was very concerned, just as a parent and a voter, about what Governor Christie was doing. For those who may not recall, because this is going back to what, 15 years ago, he was attacking teachers
it was horrible. My
aggressively.
mother was a teacher. I felt like I used to go like this when I was hearing him badmouth people. My mother worked, bless her soul, so hard as a kindergarten teacher. And to this day, I get people on Facebook thanking me about my mother.
Oh, that's
So the
lovely.
hell with him.
He was also there. Of course, this was right after the Great Recession, and he was cutting school funding pretty dramatically. The
Yes.
federal money had mostly run out, and he was trying to cut it in such a way as to take it away from the more high poverty districts. And he was pushing privatization very hard. He wanted to enact vouchers. Was working with George Norcross in South Jersey to push vouchers, and he was very aggressively expanded the number of charter schools without any concern for whether communities wanted those schools or wanted to expand them, which of course impacts the funding for the district schools in those communities. So we, as a small group of parents in Princeton, just got together and we're trying to find ways to mobilize parents to get their voices heard, to defend public education, to counter the school funding cuts, and to stop the attacks on teachers and the privatization. And we realized very quickly that being all from Princeton, we didn't really have much political power because that was one senator and two assembly members, and they were quite responsive. Our legislators were very responsive. It was Senator Turner and now Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman, who was in the assembly at the time,
Right.
and Reed Gutierrez. But there were just the three of them, and there was 39 other senators and 78 other assembly people. And so we started organizing across the state and identifying parents in other parts of the state that also wanted to fight for public education. And we grew the organization. It was all volunteer. We grew it from 6, 7 people to now it has over 36,000 people
Wow. Wow.
across
You
the
talk
state.
about a growth stock. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah, it's been quiet. I think now that Governor Christie is not in office anymore, the environment changed a lot for public education. And so you don't really have someone to push back against in the same way. So it's been kind of quiet. Of course, the scary thing is what's coming now from the federal government and what that's going to do to our public schools,
Devastating.
what they're looking at, the funding cuts they're looking at for kids with special needs. Just one example of things that I do not approve of. Potentially eliminating the requirement that there be individual study plans for students who have special needs. I think we're just at the beginning of all the damage that's going to be done. So I suspect that there will be a need for parents to and other public school supporters to mobilize really hard in the next few years.
Well, I'm about to bring in Dr. Yonatan Yoni Yares. I call him Doc because he has a doctorate of education. I have the most educated producer of any podcast or video program in New Jersey. Yoni also he works for Burlington. He works in the school system, so he has on the ground knowledge. And I'm going to turn this over to him for around 10 minutes or so because we want to discuss this aspect. As I told you before the show, one of my favorite books is The Death and Rise of the Great American Public School by Diane Ravitch. I have a reading list every year, and I also have a reading list of books I recommend to people, and this is a perennial.
Yeah, it's a
This is
great book.
a vital, vital book. But I only have one question, and I'll turn it over to Yoni. And we're getting education, politics. This is a
Yeah, it's a
this is a great
broad-ranging.
variety show tonight.
It
But
really is.
here's my one thing you didn't mention, which I think is very important, or maybe you did mention, I lost it, was you have measures to allow counties to refuse to have charter schools. I think that choice is an important thing.
What measures are you thinking of?
What's that?
What measures are you referring to?
There was something where I read something about you in terms of the possibility of a county deciding not to have charter schools.
Oh, so there was legislation that would have allowed districts, the people who live in a school district, to vote on whether a new charter school is established or an existing charter school can expand. And
Right,
it was very strongly supported. It was legislation that was championed by Save Our Schools NJ because right now the district has no say. The people who live in the district have no say
right.
whatsoever. Right.
Well, that's another victory for democracy is the right of choice. You know, I think that everyone talks about the correct role of parents and it becomes a political football. A lot of times it's about values issues that, I think get very complex. But here you're giving parents a real say in terms of their educational foundation, and you are to be commended for that. But now here he is, the one and only Doc Yares, the producer of this show, is among the minor credits on his very expansive and impressive resume. Go ahead, Doc.
Well, I can also add on that I'm married to the chair of fair funding for Cherry Hill, so I'm very much engaged on all of this on a micro level. So I'm
Right.
sure Dr. Sass Rubin and I could go on for a while on the funding thing, which would be a whole new show for us. But having worked at a charter school for a hot second, um, I could see the issue. So how do we develop accountability? Because people send their kids to charter school assuming this glorified image that we've created in media of charters being this almost the ivory tower of public education. In a way to put it.
Right.
But I saw there IEPs weren't followed. There wasn't proper staffing. There were constant checkpoints that there's accountability in public schools, but parents didn't know their rights and how to actually make sure that the school was doing right by their child.
Well, I'm sure you know that, charter laws vary substantially by state, and there are 4 or 5 states that still don't have charter schools because they've never enacted the legislation. But even the ones that do, the laws can be quite different from each other. New Jersey does not, and I'm sure you know all this, but just for the listeners' benefit, New Jersey charter schools are approved for creation or for expansion by the Department of Education, the State Department of Education, and they can be closed down by the State Department of Education. And the State Department of Education has been really winnowed down during the Christie administration and during the Murphy administration. They have lost a tremendous number of people. I just don't think they have the capacity for really effective oversight. So that is one issue that they need to, if they're going to not give communities any say in these issues around charter schools, then they need to step up and do a more comprehensive job of deciding, is a charter school performing, is it sufficiently transparent? Are people being paid appropriate amounts? As you mentioned, for district schools, there's a lot of oversight. There's a board that is publicly elected. Charter schools don't have elected boards. They can have an elected board, but it's elected by the parents. It's not publicly elected. And often they don't even have a board elected by the parents. It's just appointed by the people who are running the school. So there's a lot of opportunity for malfeasance. And so I think that it could be very minor tweaks could substantially improve the oversight of charter schools. And personally, I'd like to see elected boards that are open to the community. It's the same public dollars that are funding district schools, and there's really no reason why the oversight should be different. You could have separate elected boards from the district boards, but you could have them elected by the voters, just like district schools are. There's also the issue of quite different populations of students. I've done some research on this with Ryan Coughlin from Baruch, and we found, as did I and Mark Weber, that charter schools, for the most part, there are a few exceptions, but for the most part, are educating many fewer students who have special needs than the district schools, many fewer, and many fewer students who are English language learners, and also fewer students who are very poor. And we can talk a lot about how that happens or why it happens. The state actually has laws that require charter schools to educate the same population, but the Department of Education has not enforced that. They have not forced charter schools to do that. And so what happens is the students who are more expensive and more challenging because they have severe disabilities or they don't speak English, they end up congregated, kind of more of them end up in the district schools. And that makes it much more difficult and much more expensive to give them a good education because they're concentrated. And that's bad for the students who are attending those schools, whether they have special needs or not. So there are specific things the Department of Education could do, and there's certainly things the legislature could do. To be honest with you, I haven't felt like the will is there. I think charter schools have done a very good job of organizing their parents and bringing them to Trenton. And any reform is seen as an attack, which is really unfortunate because we reform public education all the time. Anything should be open to reform. It doesn't mean you want to end it, you want to make it better. And unfortunately, the way the charter sector has treated any effort at reform, it's like you're trying to shut them down. I don't think anyone is trying to, certainly no one serious is trying to shut down schools. There's just nothing good in shutting down schools. That hurts children. But there is definitely room for improvement. That's a very long answer, Doc.
No, but it just brings a good point. I think we could do another episode about needed reform for the Department of Education, especially if we're looking at what's coming from the federal government. The stopgap is going to be at the state level.
Absolutely.
You're so right. Doc, you are going to get together for us a show on the impact of all these federal measures, because I regard this as a must that we got to get out there, and I know you can put together. So I will be calling you like crazy to put this show together. It's going to be a must.
And I think there's a dirty word, accountability. I think especially with who the current president is, the accountability has become a dirty word.
Well, it means different things for different people, right?
Yeah.
It's all. Now, I would love to see you guys do a show about the impact of federal policy in education. I think it's going to be a huge problem.
So we're going to do it. If we say we're going to do a show, we do a show. Our idea of working half a day is 12 hours.
My father likes to say he works half a day. He picks which 12 hours.
Yes, exactly. And working with me, Yoni never knows when he's going to get a phone call or an idea, or he calls me with ideas. We're going to do shows on very controversial. So we're going to do a show dealing with the transsexual issue from all sides, because this is an issue that I would like to see consensus. The motto of our show is basically consensus, conciliation, and compromise. But this is an issue that it's really hard to do. But we are going to do shows on the focus on the impact of federal education cuts, and it's a must. Someone's got to do it.
So we're going to do it. No, you absolutely should. And it's not just cuts, right? It's also sort of dictates, executive orders and things that affect what you can teach and how you can teach it and who you can teach. And yeah, it's going to be quite broad ranging. And I agree with you, Doc, that you really need a strong Department of Education at the state level to stand up to that.
And I think two other quick notes. One, my dissertation would never be accepted at this point. My dissertation was a case study of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the impact on college access. Which we both support,
by the way.
But going back to our charter discussion, I think another area that I think charters could do better by is a lack of student activity. If we talk about right now, especially in a competing market for students, it's not about what you do after school. It's what you do to make yourself a more well-rounded person, including electives. And I see a lot of time with charter schools, they don't have it. They don't have that menu. They don't have they don't have the building and the capacity. And parents aren't aware of that. And their students are losing out on the ability to find who they are or a reason to go to school. We have a massive issue of absenteeism right now and school or college entrance.
I think another factor, absolutely, but I think another factor that might be driving that is, and again, this is the DOE's to change, is that charter schools are evaluated on their standardized test scores and, as you know, and on their financial stability. And so there's a tremendous amount of emphasis on, for the most part, again, there are exceptions, on preparing for standardized tests because it's such a do or die criteria. And if you're preparing for standardized tests, you're drilling English and math, right? And so that doesn't leave you a lot of time or resources to teach a broader range of subjects or to do a lot of extracurriculars. So I think that that might be another factor explaining what you're describing, no?
No,
And I
100%. I mean, I can tell you my first school I was at, we dropped the curriculum that was approved by the board and we were focusing on excellence in testing. Some
Right.
of it was excellent, excellent teaching metrics and things like that, but
Yeah.
the kids all knew what was going on.
And it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, the Department of Education at the state level has the ability to change the criteria used. It could be being not being segregated, right? So that the student demographics reflect the sending districts. That would be an easy thing to measure, and you could absolutely make that a criteria. Having a well-rounded education as opposed to just standardized test results. You could really low suspension and expulsion rates. These are all, we know what's important in education. These are all important criteria. That's just not how it works right now. And that could all be changed by the next governor. I don't think it's going to change at this point by Governor Murphy, but it could certainly be changed by whoever comes after him. So it's really doable.
Well, when you come back, and I'm going to beg you to come back, we're going to talk just as much on what you discussed on education just now with Doc, but also following this election, we're not looking for endorsements from anybody unless we have a show where people are arguing about who's the better candidate. I certainly am not going to be making an endorsement
Yeah, I'm not
from,
either.
but we will be analyzing how all these changes of the law are affecting election 2025.
Right.
And also education is a big issue,
It
but
is.
it's not. Last week we had the show on affordable housing, which is a sleeper issue. I don't think taxes are as big an issue in this election as normal, but we'll discuss that further. But I can't thank you enough, Dr.
Thank
Julia,
you.
for coming on the show. We are going to ask you to come on, as Franklin Roosevelt used to say, again and again. And this has been a marvelous show. I thank Doc, as always, for his great production, but also for his educational expertise. And that's why we feel we have the best political podcast in New Jersey. And we're reaching out. We're having the highest quality of guests. And you are an example of the supreme quality of guests that we have.
You are way too kind. Thank you very much, Alan. I've
Well,
enjoyed it. It's been really fun. Thank you.
well, thank you. And that concludes the show for this week. Again, I'm Alan Steinberg, the voice of dynamic political centrism, where we are seeking solutions and not just intense division, which we have too much of in America right now. Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you on Thursday night. We have a special coming. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but it's a big impact show, and all of our shows are impact shows. But have a great week, and we enjoy the feedback we're getting from our listeners. All the best, and a great week for the state of New Jersey and the United States of America. And that concludes this broadcast.
Thank you for joining us for the latest edition of Dynamic Political Centrism. Check back each week for our newest episodes, and you can catch past episodes online via YouTube and Spotify, and please subscribe to our Substack.